I'm sure.
Hello, everybody. So we're in week 7 now of 8. These 8-week classes go very, very quickly. So we're wrapping up and got a couple things to look at. Y'all may remember last Wednesday, the example went a little longer than we planned with the JavaScript. So we didn't get to the server-side scripting, but I still wanted to take a look at that a little. Just something basic to write files with. So we can save some data, have some input forms, and at least save it to a text file. If people come visit our site, come send us their email address or something, contact info, all of that. Then we have some content stuff lecture-wise. So we're gonna talk a little bit about search engine optimization. So very, very important thing to keep in mind, because it doesn't matter how nice your website is, if nobody can find it, they're not going to visit it. And finding a website these days, it means people are going to open a browser and search. Are going to have promotional flyers and stuff for websites. So you want to try to get where you rank highly on the search sites. There's a few little things we can do, or in particular, the ones I like to point out are the ones that the things to avoid, because they will automatically decrease our ratings in the search results. So definitely want to avoid those. Then CSS animations. I don't think that's on our major learning objectives list, but it makes the sites look so much better when we can animate some of those style rules we've been looking at so far this semester. So that's what's on tap for today, and that's probably going to bleed over into Wednesday's class. But so kind of the plan for the week, and after that, it's just going to be random odds and ends that I found useful from years of working with these languages that I think you'll will find useful. Kind of like the video last week when I had a cancer class. And just those weren't included in our textbook. They're not on our major learning objectives, but from making lots of websites and using CSS lots of times, I can tell you those will be very, very, very useful functions to know. So that's why I made those videos, and pretty much most of the rest of our time is going to be filled with just random things like that, so you can focus on your projects. I always like to do that in courses. Front load the courses, and that way when we get near the end, week 7 and 8, and everybody's got a project due, because pretty much all the SDEV classes do have a project due at the end. You can focus on that project. Have more time to do that. But the end of the semesters are always hectic anyway. So at the very least, making it easier in my classes gives you time for other classes, because very few people only take one class. So the first thing I want to look at is, well, that list I just mentioned. I mentioned it way back at the beginning of the semester when we were going over the syllabus. And some of y'all have heard me mention it a few times to do this 3 course. I guess I could have opened Ivy Learn before. Save y'all watching me put passwords in. All right, here we go. So way back on the first day class when we were looking at syllabus, I paused and pointed at this list down here. Major course learning objectives. And that will be the label of a list on every single course you take at Ivy Tech. And a lot of other schools require that as well. So it might change slightly at other schools, but there'll be something about the stuff you're supposed to learn. And basically it's like a checklist. These are things we're supposed to learn in course. As you move on to things that this course is a prerequisite for, you're going there, they'll expect you to know major course learning objectives. Well, not just this course, but all of your courses. From week 7 or 8, you always want to make it a point to come back and look at this list and make sure you feel like you learned the stuff you were supposed to learn. If not, those are the questions you want to ask. We've kind of gone over everything. We'll see a little bit more about getting posts today. Security is kind of important. We talked about JavaScript last week. Search engine optimization, that SEO, this normal acronym for it. Talk about that today. using stuff, software development life cycle, the process we go through. And one thing about these lists is they're usually very vague, so that they stay open to interpretation because there's different ways we can approach them. But always treat that like a checklist. Go back and check off those things. And one way to think about, or another way to think about it, is that's why you make sure you got your money's worth, right? That's the, in our case, 15 things that you paid for the class. So you want to be able to check it off and make sure you feel like you got your money's worth from the class. Though sometimes they do take a little interpretation because they are left vague on purpose. Technology changes quicker than academic councils edits those. Sometimes problematically. Last Friday, final approval finally came through on the one that it's in the Java class, the SDEV 200. For something that was deprecated in 2017, was still on that list. And I've been trying to get that changed since 2018. And finally, last Friday, actually it was past all the approvals. Last Friday, the registrars officially put it in the records. It's like, oh, so it takes that's one of the main reasons these are like vague. Technology changes. And but remember to go back to that list, check that out. We're coming near the end, so let me point at something. I was debating on whether I was going to type today's example right on Infinity Free. Next thing we're going to look at server-side scripting. Really, we're just going to put a quick form together and some inputs and write it to a text file. Because that's what we can't do with the client-side scripts. I was debating on writing it here, but I'll probably write it locally. But I'm not sure what classes everybody's taking next semester, but some of y'all might be taking the PBMS 110 class next semester, or at some point because it's required for almost all the school IT programs. And when you go to take that, it's useful to have a database around to work with. So on this free account that we've been using, this free domain hosting site, there are lots of free databases you can use when you study that. So their ad says unlimited, but it's 400. And then inside of any one of those 400, you don't have limitation. You make as many tables and shove as much data into that as you can up to the transfer rates on the free account. But it's really easy to just give it a name. Class data sounds like a good name, and hit create. Class data is one word. There you go. So it gives this new database, and the button I need to find the Zoom thumbnails. People under there can see it. Let me move these out of the way. That's the one I didn't want to collect. So the admin button over here goes to PHP My Admin, which is a common interface for working with MySQL databases. Those who have had the MySQL class, you know there's a lot of stuff those databases can do. So the interfaces for working with them are completely overwhelmed with buttons. They have to make a button for everything. So there are a lot of buttons on here, or a tab where you can just type the SQL directly. But that's a good place to go practice that stuff when you take that class. Or if you already had that and need a place for a database, there's a bunch of free ones right there. I was debating on typing our code right on the file manager here. PHP does work. Our main drag and drop sort of website building stuff, I think this class is the pathway to learn to make. Right, the main three are going to be WordPress, Wix, and Squarespace. All three of those are built off MySQL databases and use PHP for the scripting. So pretty much any free domain host in the world is going to work. PHP is going to work. It's one of our main things. So first thing about PHP is it's server-side script. It will not run on our client. So we have to have a server to run it on. So I was going to go right on here, but I think I'm going to download this other thing that might be useful for you somewhere along the way. It's on the GRE computers here, the lab I'm in. If you want to remotely access those or put people in the room, I make sure it's already installed, but you can just search for XAMPP, XAMPP. So this is a basic LAMP stack. The X stands for cross-platform. So if you download XAMPP and run it on a Linux system, a Kali Linux system, then it's a LAMP. I'm on my Windows machine today, so when I download this and install it, it's actually going to be a LAMP. Windows, Apache, MySQL, PHP, and the last P doesn't really apply. That's Perl, but it kind of phased out about 10 years ago. 10 years ago, it was starting to get rare. So last 10 to 15 years, that one phased out, but they didn't want to change the name of their software. Okay, that would cause more confusion. Python is coming back in a big way for server-side scripting. And it takes one line in a configuration file to change that last P to Python. But that's for a different. That's not for our class. That's for a different class. But your basic full stack for Apache, MySQL, and PHP, and then the X is cross-platform. So LAMP, WAMP, or MAMP stack, depending on what type of system you install it on. But you just come grab the latest release, and it will be a useful one to a useful thing to have around anyway. I like to mention this somewhere in the classes. So let's grab the one for Windows, because I don't think I've installed it yet. Is it downloaded? It doesn't seem to be starting on my, oh, there it goes. And everything's kind of configured, ready to go on this. So we don't have to do much customization at all to get it up and going. Basically just run the installer once it finishes download. There it goes. Yes, so the normal box pops up. Depending on your system, y'all know how that goes, right? There's going to be a box pop up. So you give it permission to do that. And I'm going to ignore this message. It'll be okay to ignore this message. As long as you're putting it on your primary account, the one where you normally work with it. Don't put it outside of firewalls. Don't put it like on the account that has all the parental controls on it and everything's locked down. Right? A Chromebook that you got from a high school, right? It's hard to do anything on those machines. So that's what that warning message is. If you're on your regular computer, it should be fine. Just go ahead and accept all the defaults all the way through. When you see where to put it, make sure it goes to C: makes a folder called XAMPP. I just want to point that out. It was about 6 years ago, but for some reason, when they put their installer together, I guess just out of habit, they tried to put it in program files x86 on a Windows machine, and program files x86 and program files are the two folders we do not have write access in. So that's why we normally put software there, but on our server, on a virtual server, we definitely want to have write access. So make sure it goes to a folder you have write access to. There's really only two on a Windows machine. You don't. On Windows. I'm sorry. We were just installing a virtual server to look at PHP. So if you search for XAMPP, or I think I sent an announcement out last week, didn't I?
Yeah, I think.
Okay, yeah. So just accept the default things. Yeah, I was planning on getting this to this Wednesday, but then the JavaScript glitched out. But at this point, you probably want to do more in JavaScript. It's that one thing that we can't do, which is write files. I can go ahead and start writing files while this finishes installing, and then I'll save them afterwards. That way we're not just standing here watching the meter go. I'm gonna open up text editor like normal. And I'm gonna do a whole lot of things like normal. Start typing all this stuff that we've been getting from the predictive text since like week 1. Reminder, we could leave that line off. Talk type HTML, right now we're in the middle of the standard, so obviously we're using HTML 5.2 right now, or whatever the latest HTML is. But eventually we're gonna go to HTML 6. And having been there for the previous changes, especially when, from my experience, when it changed from 4 to 5, you can leave that off, but any file you left it off of, you have to come back and put it in. It's a whole lot easier to type it the first time. And just because we have that option doesn't mean we should take it, that sort of thing. Then our regular tags, whoops. I'll create an HTML tag. And been using the predictive text, so I haven't really done this a lot, but I have pointed out before that I tend to type things in the order I think about it. So I'll set up all these basic tags. And I guess now I have to wait for this to install. I was hoping to do a little bit more. Guess I could hit enter a couple times. Put the title on here. Title, server side. Sounds like a good title for it. But what we're going to do in the body is going to be a little bit different than what we've seen so far. Close it. So the place I want, we have to save our files in a certain place. We have to save our files on this virtual server. So I have to wait for it to install before we save it. Oh, Windows Defender blocks some of that. No access. Yes, that's the next thing I'm going to do, but I'm going to check the box. Finish. And if we go in here, first thing I'm going to do is go look at where it's installed. So we added this jam folder. And you'll notice there's a whole bunch of folders, Apache, some stuff for FileZilla. There's a mail server on there, some stuff about PHP. But this one right here should look familiar, right? From that domain host we've been using all semester. We're used to putting things into an htdocs folder. So this is where we need to save all of our stuff. Just like here on that domain host we've been using. Go into htdocs folder and set up your directory structure and all your files there in order to access them from the virtual server. So now I can save this. So I'm going to save this and navigate to that folder that I just looked at. So in C drive, on Jam, in htdocs, make a new folder called server side. And after class, I will send these out in this example out in an announcement, because unlike our other examples earlier this semester, you won't be able to view this from the web page. The stuff that runs on the server never makes it to the client. So if you open up the web page, you can't see the server side scripts. So I will actually send these out. So I guess we'll start with index like normal, but instead of HTML, I'm gonna give it the PHP extension. And I'm going to go ahead and say, for at least for now, this extension is not optional. Usually the extension is arbitrary. We can change it and override it and stuff, but that can be a pain on the server. So at least for now, make sure you always put the PHP extension. Other things we can get around that, right? We can put a bunch of HTML code into a file called .abc, and if we open it with a browser, it will recognize there's HTML code. But this is going to run on the server, so we do want to make sure the server identifies it as a PHP code. And you'll notice they've got the same color changing as we get from HTML code. And one thing a lot of people like about PHP, and most of the times we intermingle other programming languages in here into HTML code, they follow suit with this. There's a special tag for the other programming language. In our case, we'll start an angle bracket and then a question mark, and then PHP, and then at the end, a question mark. So really that's one tag, but we put a bunch of code inside. It originally stood for personal homepage when one person made it for his own thing. He just needed a name and he called it PHP for his personal homepage. But it's by far the most common server-side scripting language in use. It has been for 20 years, 20 plus years. So pretty much in this entire century, this has been the most popular way to script on the server. So what it is basically it's C++ adjusted to be an interpreted language instead of a compiled language. Oh, and C++ adjusted to be a loosely typed language and an interpreted language. So loosely typed means that we don't have any data types. What we do, but all data is considered the same thing. Some of y'all may have seen that strings or integers, floating point numbers, booleans, custom objects. We have to separate all of our data types. But with a loosely typed language, we only have one data type, and they're all kind of equivalent. You can recognize them because they start with a $sign. Your variables always start with a $sign. So I'm just going to make a variable called message and put the string hello world in it. And then semicolon means end of instruction. Little technicality, I'm just going to say once. Technically, semicolon means next instruction. Computers operate off a stack. So when we write our text file, it actually reads in the last line first and throws it up that way. So when the computer's loading it in, it sees the semicolon and then the instruction. But for the rest of the day, whenever I type the semicolon, I'm going to say end of instruction because that makes a lot more sense in our text file. And that technicality just applies when we actually have to go in and worry with about what the CPU is doing. And let's just echo this back. Echo message back. So echo, there's a couple words. I'm just going to use echo today. Echo means send this to the client. So we have a string. That's how we set up our variables. And we're just going to send that right back to the client. An example, I should pull up the example that I prepared. This again, the example is to prevent me from going down any long rabbit holes up here. So just introduce some PHP. We don't need to get too complicated. So we save that. But if we tried to do this like what we've been doing, go over to File Explorer and open this, and double clicking on it, it's not going to open with the browser default by default like what we saw. If I manually try to go open with just once, all we can see is the text. It doesn't even process it as arrows and buttons. It doesn't even process the HTML tags. So what we have to do is start our server. So we have to actually start that virtual server. So if you go, you should have a XAMPP control panel. And on my Mac here, if you're on a Linux, it would have installed in /opt/lan. And you just go there and there's a script called start. You just run that. If you're on a Mac, it'll be in your normal, it'll show up in your launcher. But somewhere there's a Jamf control panel. Hopefully those aren't going to keep coming up. And this is all the parts, all the things on that server that we could go ahead and start up. So we will need at least Apache. And just like that note I made earlier, for those taking MySQL, either the second 8 weeks that's running here on campus, same time as ours, our class here is 1 to 350 on Monday and Wednesdays. If anybody's taken that second 8 weeks, or if you've already had it, that gives you a nice little local MySQL database to work around with, which also, when it started, which uses that most popular interface for MySQL databases, the PHP MyAdmin, which is not the one that the class uses, at least not with the Ivy Online shell. So you might want to take a look at the most popular interface to use it instead of the one that you use in that class. FileZilla is file transfer. I gotta close those quick. It takes a long time to turn the notifications off. Oh. Great. Maybe that'll stop the notifications. Hope so. Don't need confidential information popping up when the video is being on a recorded video and all that. So now that those are running, we can access this by going to the local host, which there's a special IP address for the machine you're working on. 127.0.0.1. And delete the rest of that. The rest of that was from a Django example the other day. That's a default way to refer to the machine you're working on. So this is kind of like entering the domain name that we've done so far. And by default, there's Jamf redirects into the dashboard thing. You might want to delete that default index and page and stuff. Just to point at the button, there's a PHP MyAdmin here as well. On that server / PHP MyAdmin. Another way we can get to this is if you just type the word localhost, as long as your server has been started, it will go ahead and run. Some people prefer that, using the words. I believe everybody in this class was on one of the software development programs. So at some point down the line, you're gonna have to get used to typing those numbers. But you can access Jamf just by typing localhost as well, if you prefer words. And then from localhost, that's our domain. So we made a folder called something. Does anybody remember what I called the folder? Server-side. And notice I used a dash, not an underscore. That's going to be important when we get to search engine optimization here. Very break program. So there's the message we sent back. So I right click and view the page source. Notice it's just that message. Nothing else extra in it or anything. Which we've already seen before means we can't style it. Let's add some style rules. Let's see what happens with style. I'll do them right here this time. This is something else we haven't done since the beginning of the semester, right? So at this point, we can see the problem. What would we need in order to style those words? There's no way to access them yet, right? The tags make them identifiable. Let's throw in some H1 tags. So I want to concatenate an H1 tag onto the front of this. And We have two ways to concatenate. So the dot is concatenation. But then there's another way we can concatenate that's even better. So that's going to put those strings together and send it back to us with some tags so we can apply some styling to it. Or we can at least see there the default styling is applied. And view the page source, it added the tags on. So that is one thing you'll want to do every time you echo stuff back. Remember to add your tags. And then that, like that thing we looked at the other day with client-side scripting, can make a difference when the style sheet sees it. So let me just add a color to it or something. Color line. That seems like a good color. Reload it. Notice that it was in time. Was in time to apply that style. It didn't happen afterwards, like we saw can happen with client-side scripting. There's a better way to concatenate here. All of our loosely typed languages, we can do this in all of them, that to concatenate things, we can just throw our variable right into the string. So as I open the string, start typing some stuff that's going to show explicitly, and then all variables start with a $sign, so the variable can just go right in there. That's one of the really nice things about loosely typed languages. We don't have to worry about extra steps for concatenation or anything like that, which this again is going to result in the exact same thing. Notice we can't see that came from PHP. At this point, that could have just been manually typed in there. So that's some basic stuff. Basic idea, but probably want to do something. Let's set up an example where we can actually do something like this. So first off, I'm going to add a link here. A paragraph. I'm actually going to add a couple links by the time we're done. So put them just inside a paragraph. Throw in an anchor tag and reference some other page. Well, might as well make it look right. So we have our home page. We can go ahead and do that one, and then maybe a non-breaking space or two. I'll just copy and paste, stick that non-breaking space in there. That's probably the longest line that's going in this file, so I'm going to turn word wrap off. That way the links are spaced out at least across in a line. But we'll need another page. href. Let's make something called inputs.html. Write a blog post. That would be a good example. And paste in a couple spaces. And notice that one's an HTML, going to be an HTML page. We can mix and match them, but for a blog entry thing, which can be very, very similar to what some of your final projects are going to have, probably just have a single text input line instead of a text area, right? We need a bunch of space to type a blog. But otherwise, it's going to be very, very similar. That's kind of why I picked that for an example. So here we can make a just regular HTML page. It's like always, I don't think it's good work. For class, to keep it simple, I'm going to stick them all in the same folder, but a little bit of organization goes a long way. So remember that when you get to that. And this one I'll just do quickly again. Blog sounds like a good name for it. And this one, we want to use a form. Use predictive text as much as possible. Humans make typos, machines don't. Copy and paste, all of that stuff. As long as it's, you end up with the right thing. I remember the other day in client side, when we were looking at client side scripting, I said, be careful using forms for the client side because your buttons will automatically try to submit that form. So we were putting those in other sorts of containers. But here we will want this to be automatically submitted. I guess first off, we should probably make a form. What do we need for a blog? The title. We'll add an input with type equals text. And the attribute we have to put on here is the name attribute. As mentioned earlier, the name attribute is what gets sent to the server. I'll just call it title. And then in the paragraph, whoops, get a zoom thumbnails out of my way so I can type without constantly moving in. Okay. What else do we need? Another paragraph. And I'm gonna put a text area. Let's say 25 rows and maybe 40 columns, so 40 characters wide. That might be a good size for it. You know, we can come back and check if we need to be. And that's the little text editor input. We saw that when we were looking at forms, just basic HTML forms. But again, we're going to send it to the server this time, so we need to give it a name. I'll call it blog. And unlike the other inputs, text area does have an open and closed tag. And we can, what we put in between those tags will start showing up in that text editor. And that, I guess next we need to finish up with the submission buttons. So we'll send input with the submit type value. I'll use the word blog, so I'll set it to post to the blog. And might as well put a clear button while we're at it. Type is reset. And value is clear. We should be able to preview that page now. Our home page, write a blog post. So we got a place to add a title and type some words in. That's something some of y'all might have need for in your projects, right? Maybe not like a blog post, but at least some little inputs, maybe some numbers, different things like that. And whatever the input is, as long as you have it going somewhere, all you have, if you're going to process it a little, make sure you have the name tag. Whoops. I'm going to call this test 1. And this is the first test. I'm going to hit post. There's no processing done, but does anybody see what happened up in the address bar? This is what's called a query string. So here's the page we're on, inputs.html. And at the end, it's like a question mark. And then the data that we typed in there. So technically we should call it a parameter, but more of y'all might be familiar with the word variable here. So a variable is assigned the value test. So a variable called title has been given the value text. Then an ampersand, so and this variable blog has been assigned a string here. And notice there's no spaces. So it's this word plus this word plus this word plus. You manually type those in if you want. That's how we send the data to the server. We just stick it in the URL. And with query strings, I like to think of that question mark like a hook. It's like we have a big chain of data and we're just going to hook it onto the address, and the machines will know what to do from there. So those two attributes, action and method, that we weren't really able to look at the first time. So method is how we send it to the server. The two you're going to use most often are going to be post and get. They'll behave very, very similar. The difference is get is the one that it does by default, where we can see it in the address bar. And post, we can't see it in the address bar, so it's not as visible as it transfers across the network. Somebody has to really, really work to dig it out of network traffic. It's obviously still possible, but it's still possible if you capture all the network traffic and then spend a lot of time later digging it out. But with get, it's just the strings there, so you can see it immediately. So ultimately, you'll probably use post a little more often. But when you're debugging things and trying to fix problems, it's very, very useful to be able to see the data. So probably want to start with get, and then when you get all the bugs worked out, then switch to post. And the action, so what action do we want the server to take with this? Basically, that's saying, asking what form is going to process. So I'll make a form called save post. Save post PHP. Or sorry, not a form, a script. So we'll fill out our form. When we submit it, it's going to go with the get method, so it's visible in the URL to the server, and then the server will pass it into this PHP script there. So I guess we need to create that. Copy that, start a new one, and save it with that name, save post.php. And again, from the PHP, it does trigger the text editor to do all of the predictive text for HTML. So once again, from the letters HT, which I think would have worked from H as well. Got all of that pre-typing started. But now that we're nearing the end of the semester, whatever text editor you use, that is customizable. I didn't want to say that at the beginning of the semester because it's an easy rabbit hole to go down. But if you start digging around in your settings, you'll find that the text and templates and things are entirely customizable. I just named the list. Actually, we don't. This page is never going to be viewed though. I just wanted to show the predictive text there. This one is for processing the script. So this is all this one needs at all is that PHP tag. So I'm going to set up a place to grab that data we're sending from our form. Again, it's a loosely typed language, so all variables just start with a $sign. And we'll assign that to a special value. It's going to be $_get in all capital letters. And I just talked about how we switch this to post. So hopefully you already figured out that if we send it with the post method, it needs to be $_post. Whatever, that needs to match your method. And then that's what's known as an associative array. There's different terms for them. For those who've used Python before, it's going to be most like a dictionary until you get in and start digging around what's happening with the what's actually passing through the C++, so like your advanced data structure class. For those who take a class like that later. But it's like an array, but we index it from words or strings instead of numbers. So way more useful. And then the string we need to put here was the name attribute from our input, the thing that showed up in the URL. So title equals test in that example. So there is a value coming in. Then end of instruction is based off C++. So it's loosely typed, interpreted C++. So make sure you always remember your end of instruction character. I think I showed that a couple weeks ago, didn't I? I'll throw it in at some point today. I'll leave the leaving off your semicolon in PHP is one of the cases where you don't get an error message. The page just doesn't work. And depending on your setup, it might just crash your server altogether. Then we have another one here. Blog is $_get. And we gave it the name attribute blog, I think. End of instruction. Yes. So title and blog. So there's our data from the that we're getting from those input forms. And first off, I'm just going to echo it back. I'm going to make a variable called new post. And I could just echo it back directly, but I'm sticking in a variable because I'm going to do more things here very, very shortly. And we can just calculate those together. So like, we'll go into title. Then maybe you can calculate on the new line character. Then the blog. Oops, I forgot a dot. And that throws people off quite a bit because we don't do that very much anymore. For the time, that was pretty common to calculate with the dot. But, pointers went out of fashion and then dot. So dot means something else, or is most point anymore. So that throws people off. The plus sign only means addition. So in calculate, you don't need to do that. Then we can echo back new post and just see if it processed through like it was supposed to. So the title, testing 1, 2, 3. It is critical to test your scripts at every step along the way. A good way to start off a blog. You know what? I don't think that did that. It didn't echo the stuff back though. Post by PHP, all that. Let me take this off and try that again. Testing 1, 2, 3. Test. There we go. That's what I was expecting. It actually went to another page and echoed it back. I think that previous time I hadn't reloaded the page since adding the action and method attributes in. I think might look right though, right? If I go to view page source, we did put a new line in there. This will be something very, very important because as you move on through the software development program in general, and then into the field, in the modern world, we tend to use HTML and CSS to build our graphical user interfaces anymore, instead of the local libraries. Most of the SDEV classes are 200 level SDEV classes have changed over to that, using some sort of web framework, because there's another thing called Docker that you'll see that we can just create a container. If we have a web app, we can just make a little, basically a case for it so that we can open it on a local desktop. and we only have to write one application. So that's become much more standard. So you'll probably be doing a lot of echoing things back to HTML pages like that. So just like we saw earlier, you probably want to put in your HTML tags. So I'm going to wrap this in quote marks. Most modern text editors, if you highlight it and hit the opening quotation mark, it'll throw in the closing one. And then we can add some tags in here, so like H2/H2 a paragraph. Paragraph could be a problem because our text editor allows us to put line breaks in there. So really, if it was more than just a quick example, we probably want to go through and find all the line breaks the text editor sent to us and replace those with breaks, which is a very, very common thing. So there's a function built into PHP to do that. So one of the nice things about PHP is people have been adding functions to the language for 20 plus years. There are tens of thousands of functions. It is very, very unlikely that you would ever need to do something on your web page that isn't already a function built in PHP. There's just lots and lots of stuff there. That should give us some nice little formatting. I'm going to add one more thing, just to accelerate instead of coming back and doing it later. I'm going to add the horizontal rule afterwards to, that's that gray line, the separate things. Maybe a couple breaks in there as well. HTML breaks. But in general, remember, if it's going to a web page, you need to include the tags in your string. That way you can do things with them. That should get us something we can see. That looks a little bit more like a blog post. There was a long thing there. So if I go back to, nope, I don't have a link going back. So maybe we should have some links here, but actually I want to change this. So testing is a critical thing to do in software development. Leave some space. Always test your software thoroughly. So a couple of paragraphs, and I post that. We lost our paragraph break. I'm going to skip that for our example here. If anybody needs that for your final project, let me know and I'll throw it in later. But we are under tight time constraints. That problem that so often shows up in classrooms is we are very, very restricted for time. Now the main thing we actually wanted to get to, we didn't want to echo that back to the page. Well, maybe after we have a bunch of them, we want to echo it back to the page. But the thing we couldn't do on client-side scripting because it would be a major security risk. We can't have any old website start writing files on our computer. So client-side scripts don't have right to access it. But if we need to save data, so for example, on your final projects, you might have a contact thing where people enter their email address. And you want to save their email address so you can contact them, or their phone number or something. That can be important. So we might want to save it. So what we need is a file handler. And there's a subtle difference here, which isn't really included in our class, but a file handler and a file are not the same thing. Sometimes you'll see textbooks referring to the same thing. A file handler is the thing that can see our data. So I like to think about the old reel-to-reel tape machines. Anybody seen that? Like history books and museums.
Parents have one at home.
But yeah, so there was our data was stored on the 1 inch wide tape, which it really is just 2 pieces of Scotch tape with iron shavings between them, like powdered iron between them. And then I'm going to draw it as two things here. So there's two magnets. Going to kind of accentuate the process. So we have two magnets. One of them is on a spring and the other one's loaded stiff or held stiff. So if we want to write data, we send an electric pulse to this magnet that's held stiff, and then that changes the polarity of the iron in that tape. And if we want to read data, we activate the one on the spring, which actually there'd be one read head. So we'd switch between holding it still, locking it in place, or using a spring on it. And then it bounces up and down depending on the polarity of that. And that's how we would read and write. But our data, 0, 1, 0, 1, is spread out across that tape. That's the file. And the read head, the thing that we work with, that is just the thing that can see our data. And file handlers are a similar thing. File handlers allow us to access the data or change bits and pieces of it. Whereas working with the actual file, we do the same things we would do in File Explorer. We copy and paste that file somewhere else. We move it to a different directory and work with the entire thing at once. It's a subtle difference, but software developers really should know that difference, and most textbooks are going to act like they're the same thing. So we need to work with our data. So we need a file handler. And to make it easier to work with, we'll just store it to a variable like always. So $, and for those who have seen me in a few classes, I think you know what names I use for file handlers. Keep it straight. For the example, we have our file handler to the file. So our writing file handler. And we use this method called fopen. For those who have seen Python, it should look very, very familiar, except we had an F for our file. Fopen, and then what file do we want to open? I want to open my blogs.txt. It's a place to save it, and I'm going to open it for append mode. End of instruction. So for some of y'all, that should look very familiar, right? It's a different language than you may have worked with before, but logically it's the same. We create a file handler and then save a reference to it so that we don't have to type that every single time we want to use it. A reference is really just an easier way to type it. But that's like the write head, the one held on those old machines. I like to refer to that because it's something we can physically picture. We can see those magnets either being stationary as the tape moves past or bouncing up and down as the tape moves past. It's hard to visualize what's going on in the CPU when it's just a chunk of silicon. So that opens our file handler. And then we can call this method fwrite. And this needs two arguments to fill the parameters it was created with. The first one is what file handler is it writing on? So we want to use that file handler, and we're going to write the new post. And then that critical one, for those who have seen things about writing files before, but we always want to keep straight, right? If I split this up, it's, I can probably do it this way. Bring this over here, and this one here. And we need to close something, or all right, close that file and type to file. Okay. That happens a lot to humans, but we're going to notice that immediately. Right? Cursor was in the wrong spot. Start typing that. We're intelligent. We will notice it immediately. A machine will never notice that it's in the wrong spot, and it will just carry out whatever instructions you give it, wherever it's at. So it's absolutely critical. It's absolutely critical to make sure you close your files every time, or close your file handler. No, let's echo something different. Echo, the file is written. Save that. After I save all the changes here. Well, we need some sort of thumbnail title input. A label. Oh, wait, this is the first real test. First test. This is the first real test of writing some files from inputs on a web page. I got the message saying that file is written, so should be able to find it somewhere. Oh, there it is. So this text file, now a text file called my blogs. It didn't exist, so it created it, and then threw all of that up there. Because we need to read that though, when we probably want to see. We need a way to see the blog posts because we're saving them. So probably eventually want a big line of blog posts. And the fact that I just looked at the clock and decided to do this before break time, tell you it's going to be really, really quick, right? It's going to be a lot of copy and paste. So I'm going to call this one, I'll go ahead and give it a name. I'll call this read post.php. And this is what people are going to look at a lot. So I'm going to come back over to the index page and copy some stuff from here. Well, first off, I'm going to add a link to it. Read PHP, read blog post in the anchor tag, and then we can end the paragraph. That's the last link you need. And now to make it nice and consistent like a web page, we probably want a whole bunch of this stuff to show up on every single one, right? So I'm going to copy all that stuff from the top, paste that in there so we still have the links and everything. Might as well paste that on the same post too. That way we can, when we get that message, we can go read the other blogs or all that stuff and then go back to the file is written. Inputs already had that. We probably don't need a style. Take that out so that style tag we used to demonstrate one little point earlier would just be clutter in the example. I'm going to take that style out. You don't know how to do style tags. We've done lots of CSS this semester, right? It's been a lot more CSS than anything else. So we have those links. This one's a PHP script, so somewhere down here after our navigation, I'm going to add a PHP tag. A couple lines to type the PHP. Then we can end the body tag and end the HTML code. So to write the file, we created a file handler called this fwrite and fclose method. It's very, very similar. We do have to make a slight change. I'm going to call this one from file, but it's still the fopen method. We're still reading my blogs. What do I call it? Yeah, my blogs. .txt. I'm not really changing that. I was expecting things to change colors here, but I'm not really sure why it's not. Hopefully it's Hopefully I'm not overlooking something small. But only this time we went in read mode, and again, end of instruction. I have no idea why it's not changing colors. Hopefully that's not a problem. And, well, before we had the F write method, so there is an F read method to counter it. First thing we need is which file handler do we want to read from? And then we have to say how many bits to read, or how much to read. Because some data sets might be very, very large, right? And we don't want to wait until we've read the entire, 50 million data points is a small data set for the modern world. We don't want to wait until we have all 50 million data points for them to start showing up on the page. So we have to say how far it is, but for our case here, and probably anything that will work on the projects based off the descriptions you gave me, we can just use the file size function. It's one word, jammed together, all lowercase. File size, and we want the size of myblogs.txt. End of instruction after all those closing parentheses. And yeah, I have no idea why it's not changing colors. It should be. And then again, as always, remember to close your file. I'll leave that up there for those typing along. And I'm going to send this out afterwards because again, we can't see what's on the server script from there. I go here. Oh, I did not read it. Well, that one's not changing colors when I copy and paste it over either. Did I save it in the right spot? Oh, that's where it's on.
Is it supposed to be a semicolon at the end of the read blog post /a?
This one?
Two or three, yeah, like around there.
Oh, yes. Actually, that one we could leave off. On HTML 5.1 standard, they decided the special code should include that. So I think your book leaves them off. So anytime we do those like copy, we should put a semicolon at the end. That came about in 2020. So that's a fairly new rule. That's why the book didn't have it. PHP tag.
See, it's not interpreting that as PHP.
Yeah.
That's weird.
Well, might have to look at this a break here in a second to see why it's not reading it. Oh wait, actually it might have worked. I did things out of order and I skipped Let me retype what was there. File size of my blogs.txt. So actually, I just did something really silly. This is the problem. Whole testing thing. So we read it, but then what do we do with it? We should probably do something with it after we read it. Let's see if that helps. Echo. Oh, I'm turning word wrap off. You turn word wrap off, and then if I hold shift and end, oh, arrows come back once, then they can hit a parenthesis and wrap those in parentheses. Because echo method needs all of that passed in. I have no idea why it's not changing colors. But yeah, after reading the file, we actually have to do something with it. You get our data back, and otherwise it just sits in RAM for a split second, and then the computer erases it because it's not being used. There we go. Okay, so it was typed correctly, everything was working correctly. We just have to watch out for human error. And we should be able to add another file to it. It is also important to run mini tests. Post that. The file is written, so there's our message. And if we go over to read them, look at that. So that we can save the data. It's not gone as soon as we close the browser and stuff like that. A very quick introduction to PHP. So the big thing is it's a loosely typed language, which also, like we saw here, means we have the really nice form of concatenation. The trade-off for that is we need escape sequences at $signs. So you have to do \$ if you want a $sign, because it means something to the language. Remember to put your tags in there. If it's going to a web page or something like this, it's only going to ever show on the web page. I'm just going to stick it in the text file. You can add those after it comes back from the text file, or however you want to do it. Every situation is a little bit different. But I was thinking some of y'all might have some things that you want to save data for with your final projects. And that would be the basic save the data, which will be plenty sufficient for the final project and get you started down that path. There's a lot to learn in PHP. It's a huge language. People have been adding functions for over 20 years. That's one of the nicest things about PHP is it's bigger than most of our languages. There are tens of thousands of functions. So obviously no way to remember them all. Just remember where the documentation is. Tutorials, for those who haven't heard me say it before, except for probably didn't say it much. Let's say, I'll look at one we just did, right? File and PHP. Go Google this, and there's official documentation, which is really, really hard. Oh, that's not official documentation. Here it is, php.net. Oh, I don't want file contents, but php.net is the official documentation. So always look here first. The documentation is like the user manual. This is how you use it. Documentation is really boring, and especially at first, it's going to be hard to follow. But you want to look here first, and then go to the tutorial, and use the tutorial to learn to read the documentation. Because tutorials don't ever cover the whole thing. Tutorials go out of date. That's a big one. The documentation will always show the entire language and be up to date, but it's hard to follow. So here we look at it, it's like, okay, my file is this file handler. Oh, okay, that's what they meant in that documentation. Then jump back over to the documentation to make sure you understand how to read this. And that way you don't have to follow a tutorial step by step for everything you need to do. Right? On our learning pathway, we want to break away from tutorials as quickly as possible. So that's always my recommendation is use tutorials to learn to read the official documentation. Oh, that page it's not quite a full website yet because I forgot it. There are the links. There we go. And now that should seem kind of like a full site that has this stuff. We can go back and forth between all of our pages, except that confirmation page. We don't need direct access to a confirmation page. So an hour and 15 minutes, and I talked for a few minutes there at the beginning. So could use some style, but a couple weeks ago, did you think you were going to be writing, we'd be able to make it an example site in an hour? Probably would have thought it'd take longer than that, right? An example site with a brand new programming language goes together quickly. Hopefully all that made sense. I will send these files out after class, because again, I go to localhost / server side, I think is where I put it. Read blog post. If we view the page source, we can't see the part that runs on the server. So unlike the other examples this semester, I can't just put that on the domain host. And y'all can't just go to where I stuck it on the internet and see what that code is. So I'll send that out after class. Does anybody have any questions about the PHP? Okay, so some simple things like that would be my recommendation when we get to lab time in a little while. But before we do that, there's some more stuff to go over. But first, 10 minutes on to everybody. See big head nods here in class. So my laptop says 2:17. We will get back to it at 2:27. See y'all in just a moment.